If there's one thing that's defined the last few years, it's masks. We spent the majority of our time, when we were allowed outside the house at least, wearing masks. I mean, at least those of us who have empathy for our fellow human beings and aren't full-on idiots. But anyway, masks. We've all been wearing them, which kind of makes cosmic sense with the way that superheroes have taken over pretty much everything over the last decade. I mean, sure, the pandemic pretty much shutting down cinema did kind of slow that down with no big superheroes out in 2020, leaving them all bunched up over the second half of 2021 into 2022. The whole genre, or at least the Marvel corner, came to a crescendo in 2019 when Avengers Endgame came out. Huge box office figures, huge merchandise sales, blanket coverage of all of it. And then 2020 and a good chunk of 2021, nothing. Just everyone cutting about in masks. So let's look at how the superhero movies have dealt with masks because, what else have we got to do at the moment? Now, why is this interesting, Phil? Well, because superhero masks, in the main, take away probably the biggest tool a movie or TV actor has, their eyes. Right, a very quick whistle-stop tour of acting. Masks were first used in things like ancient Greek theatre as a way to show different characters and whatnot. This continued through Japanese no drama in the 14th century and the European Renaissance of the 16th century, before broadly dying out in Western theatre as we moved into the 20th century. The masks helped because theatre actors generally are acting to the back row, so anything that can help them stand out and get across the meaning of a scene or character, the better. Now, with the advent of movies, this changes. Now the audience is in the camera, not at the back of an auditorium. And that camera could be 2 feet or even closer to your face. What would work on the stage wouldn't work on camera, and some people soon realised that for the camera, less was more. Movie and later TV acting soon became all in the eyes. And masks would cover up your eyes, like with superheroes. Like with acting, the superhero mask also has a long history, obviously. Way back you had masked detective characters from the pulp era that influenced comics like The Spider and The Clock, which then influenced the first superhero characters like the Phantom, which led to Batman and Green Lantern and so on. These comics were hella popular, so it wasn't long before the movie industry began to work their magic. Batman was made as a movie serial in 1943 alongside the Phantom, both fully going with the masked look of both characters' comic origins. Well, almost. The Phantom would be the first superhero masked with no visible pupils, something that would become a staple of superhero comics. The budget didn't quite stretch to that on the movie serial, though. The budget didn't really stretch to anything. A Captain America serial would soon follow in 1944, again doing the best to replicate the mask with the budget at the time, which would be about it for masked superheroes for a little while. The George Reeves Superman TV series would be the next big success. Then there would be a bit of a gap until Adam West Batman jumped into the movie screens in the 60s, bringing back the mask. So the trend so far has been for masked superheroes where you can still see their eyes and their mouth, which would continue with Batman in 89 and the films that followed in the wake of that film. Now all that would change in the early 2000s, mainly with Spider-Man and kind of with the X-Men films. With X-Men you had Scott Summers, whose powers are crazy energy blasts from his eyes, which means he has to wear special sunglasses or a visor when he's off being a superhero.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
So his eyes were covered, but you could still see his eyebrows and mouth and that. You'll note, however, the rest of his team were maskless, unlike most of their comic counterparts. Not so with Spider-Man. Nope, Spidey had a full mask covering his whole face, which, isn't that good for acting. In the comics, the artist could cheat this by amending the eye shapes and that to get across an emotion, but that wasn't something you could do with a live-action mask at the time. But that didn't stop his films becoming properly massive, huge successes that changed the superhero game forever. And of course, he would spend a good chunk of the film as Peter Parker. You know what? Let's dig into this for a bit. We'll do this by dropping the first Spidey film into a legitimately owned video editor, then chopping it up between the shots so we can fully see Peter Parker or Spidey's face, and then everything else. As you can see, based on a total runtime of 2 hours and 55 seconds, 8 minutes and 29 seconds is your start and end credits. Then for 1 hour, 12 minutes and 26 seconds, or roughly 60% of the film, you don't see Peter or Spidey's face at all. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not there, you just might only see the back of his head in a reverse shot or something. Peter Parker's face is on screen for 13 minutes and 26 seconds, or 25% of the total runtime, with Spidey's face being on screen for 9 minutes and 34 seconds, or just 8% of the total screen time. We can break that down a little bit more between Spidey's fully masked face and Spidey's own masked face, which is 6 minutes 31 seconds and 3 minutes and 3 seconds respectively. So, in a film called Spider-Man, we see Peter Parker's face 17% more than the guy on the poster. That does make sense. What would it be in the origin film? I mean, Spidey doesn't properly turn up until like an hour into this one. So let's see what it's like in the sequel. You do get more Spidey bang for your buck in this film, with his total face time increasing to 12 minutes 47 seconds. Interestingly, the time of the mask only increased slightly to 7 minutes 11 seconds, whereas the unmasked Spidey time jumped up to 5 minutes 36 seconds. As a percentage of the overall screen time, this increases slightly to 10% of the total runtime, with the amount of Parker time increasing as well to 28%. So for both films, they were mainly Peter with a bit of Spidey, with him at points arbitrarily losing his mask for the big emotional moments.
We have to shut it down.
Peter Parker. Brilliant but lazy.
Now, as a baseline comparison, let's compare this to Batman 89. Initially, the comparison was going to be the first Superman, but with him being maskless the entire time, that's not a great comparison. Whereas the first Batman compares nicely. It's not really an origin film, but has elements of that to it, and was marketed in a similar way, focusing on the costume. Here we have way less Batman, with him and Bruce Wayne only having their face on screen for a total of 16% of the film. And this is with a comparable running time compared to the Spidey films. Now this kind of makes sense when you consider the Joker was played by big marquee name Jack Nicholson, certainly a bigger name at the time than Michael Keaton as Batman, which I think explains the name order of the poster. The Spidey films have big name actors playing villains, but they aren't marquee names like Nicholson. So that would explain the disparity there. So looking at the numbers, the Spidey films in the main feature an unmasked Peter Parker, but the marketing and iconography of the films were all built around the superhero in a full mask. And with the money they made, they were soon seen as a proper blockbuster template that studios could properly get behind that led to the explosion in comic book films. None of the films after that really had fully masked superheroes though, not in the same way that Spidey did. At least not until Iron Man. Now Iron Man took a similar but different approach to Spidey. They retained the Iron Man face covering helmet design, but introduced a brand new approach to Iron Man. This being the close-up of Tony Stark's face in the suit with the head-up display floating in front of him. This wasn't something you'd ever really seen in the comics. The main influence for the shot came from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like with Spidey in the comics, they would cheat the face of Iron Man's helmet to have an expression by altering his eye and mouth shape, which again isn't something you can really do in live action. The helmet is fixed. You'd also get like a half and half split of the character's face with the mask next to it, but again that's awkward to do in live action. This close-up of Tony's face was genuinely new, and helped build that emotional connection to the character. I mean, he still arbitrarily lost his mask at the climax in proper Spider-Man fashion, so, you'll always have that. The rest of the heroes in that initial first phase of Marvel films were also mainly masters, excluding Captain America, who had a redesigned, more military aesthetic influenced by the Ultimates comic. Of course, the mask would be proper loose and would fly off when required, so he was really essentially maskless. Of course, Iron Man had ways around the mask as well. Initially, the front plate would kind of open up so you could see Tony in the suit. Then, in Iron Man 2, the bad guy's mask folded away, which set a very large precedent. It was Guardians of the Galaxy that fully utilised this and made it something that the MCU would fully embrace. Outcome Star with a full mask on that would just vanish because, space science. Now, Iron Man 2 had introduced the concept to the suits forming around Tony rather than being added or removed by machines, which was then expanded in the Avengers, and then Iron Man 3. So when Iron Man would get in on the vanishing mask action as well, initially because crazy Iron Man technology, and then after that just, nano machines, it was a logical progression from initial faceplate opening. But it wasn't just Iron Man though. The magic moving mask would end up with other heroes in the MCU. In Civil War, Spidey had the Romita-style squinty eyes that would actually move like in the comics. But he still needed to pull his mask off when he wanted to until Infinity War, where Spider-Man would get the Iron Spider suit, which pulled the same mask vanishing trick. Then Black Panther would show up with his suit vanishing because, again, nanomachines. By the time you get to Endgame, masks are barely an inconvenience, with them vanishing at the drop of a hat, or, drop of a mask. Makes you feel a bit bad for Ant-Man, who has to keep hitting a button to pop his mask open and closed.
Not bad for a test drive. You charge big, you dive small.
That was a lot scarier a second ago. Hi, I'm Scott.
Did he just say, hi, I'm Scott?
Located the breach, bringing him in. Sorry about this. Good.
Is that you?
Hi, Peanut.
Does anyone have any orange slices?
And then, you look at the Wasp. You can understand this as it allows the filmmakers to have it both ways. They get to have their superhero mask with the bonkers CG sequences, hiding faces to make it easier to sell the effects to the audience, and then we have the mask runners for the next proper acting scene. I mean, this is kind of annoying. I mean, that might be too much, but it irks me. Stark having a mask that vanishes makes sense as it speaks to his character. I mean, he's an incredibly rich narcissist, so will always go for overly complicated things to make his life easier, like being able to walk and have the armour removed. Something that, in another film, is something a bad guy would do. But the whole point of the mask is to protect your identity when you're a superhero. This is, of course, something that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has barely flirted with. In the first Iron Man film, it ends with Tony not being able to keep the secret to himself.
I am Iron Man.
Thor is, Thor. Steve Rogers has an entire museum about him in Captain America. In the comics, the Marvel Civil War is about heroes having to register their secret identities with the government. But in the MCU, it's all just out there. It's only really Spidey that really dealt with the pitfalls of secret identity, and that was post the MCU Civil War.
Peter Parker! What the?
Which was more about working under government orders rather than independently. The whole thing about secret identity just, wasn't mentioned. The secret identity is supposed to protect the wearer so they can go about fighting crime without anyone able to hurt the ones they love, like with Spidey. Or to protect the vigilante from the legal repercussions of going about punching folk. That's why Batman has that funky electrical thing in his mask. That's pretty much all pushed to one side in modern superhero films. A good example is Superman. The Clark-Lois dynamic from the first Donner film was all about that push and pull between the two personas and the separation between the two. Then by Man of Steel, it's all all out in the open with Lois full-on shouting his name with anybody around.
Clark!
We can blame a lot on social media, so is there something else we can blame on that as well? Back in the era of that first Superman film, hiding an aspect of yourself was much easier. That's probably why you had so many serial killers doing their business all over the place in the 70s. By Man of Steel, we're 6 or 7 years after the launch of Twitter and a year after the purchase of Instagram by Facebook. We were more than used to celebrities, and annoyingly, the closest thing we had to superheroes in the real world, posting images of their dinner and moaning about normal things like everyone else. How is a superhero influencer supposed to manage a secret identity in that environment? It's got to the point that even Superman told the world his identity, in the comics at least. Alright, yeah, you can probably also blame the rise of X-Men in the 80s and 90s comic, as they're essentially always in their super identity. So that's probably where the secret identity concept started to erode. But social media is a much more topical subject, so we'll keep to that. And it's something that Marvel Comics was built on. And the comic that made the company was Fantastic Four, released in 1961. Characters that specifically had no secret identity that were more like celebrities. So this becoming the default MCU stance on secret identities does kind of make some cosmic sense. But anyways, movies. Superhero masks highlight that dynamic between the business and the art side. A comic book hero like Batman is great as everyone knows that concept, but it stops the marketing guys from putting a big known face on the poster. Batman probably isn't a great example as that character and brand is iconic enough to carry the marketing by itself at this point. I mean, see the Batman 89 marketing campaign built solely around the Bat logo. But how many truly iconic mass superheroes are there? Batman, Spider-Man, Zorro? Iron Man has already been iconic now due to the heavy lifting by Downey Jr. That's why he's on the majority of the posters just as much as the mask. It also helped that the first Iron Man film is genuinely a really good film, as we have plenty of instances of trying to stick a big name under a mask and it, didn't work at all. The MCU may not see the value of having masks. Of the upcoming films, the only ones that will have masks will be the Black Panther sequel, the next Ant-Man film, Guardians 3 maybe. But they're an intrinsic part of the classic superhero concept that goes back to their creation. Besides, having a mask makes it way easier to recast the role when the actors inevitably decide to move on. Meaning, unless you're James Bond. But then, everyone knows that's a code name anyways, right?
This never happened to the other fella.